going forward and based on feedback we're hearing, we might manage that process going forward. We might define those project areas so that we capture even more rural areas of Louisiana that may have not been captured this first time.
So do we need a different checklist for those funds, application for those funds, or superintendent should look at, reference the same checklist?
I think they could reference largely the same checklist because again, mechanically speaking, the Gumbo program will have slight tweaks, but we'll review the checklist again. And if we need to make some modifications, we'll make those modifications and share with you all.
Okay, great. Mr. Melvin, we got feedback at the table last meeting before last from one school district that still did not have the broadband connectivity, and there seemed to be some confusion about the process. I had inquired about adding an agenda item to the Superintendent's Advisory Council meeting. Opportunity to review the checklist, come forward with any questions or concerns they might have, just to make sure that it's getting circulated through all the superintendents. I was told that had to go through this board, so I'm not familiar with that process, but I want to get some clarification so that we can get this item on the ZAC agenda, so that make sure that all superintendents have a copy of the checklist and give them an opportunity to ask a question. So I'm looking for some help procedurally how we can make that happen.
Okay, we'll make sure that it's referred to them at the next time.
Great, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Harvey?
Yes. I've heard what I think is some confusion, and I want to see if we can get it cleared up, as to whether this project is intended to bring high-speed internet to our schools or to our families. My understanding is that T1s and T3s are already available to get high-speed internet to our schools, and that this project really is focused on getting broadband out to residential areas, rural residential areas. Could you address that, please?
So y'all have done a great job. Every public, elementary, middle, high school in Louisiana, wherever they are, has access to largely fiber optic speeds. Every library, public library in the state has it. It's really getting, once you leave the four walls of the school, once you leave the four walls of the libraries, to get it to the household. So it's really for the household.
So at this time, families can either, students can either access high-speed internet at their schools or at their libraries, but not necessarily at their homes.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Horsham?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for all your leadership in what is obviously such a complex and important body of work for our entire state and all of our constituents. You mentioned you were about to go to a meeting with farmers, and that was a focus group. Can you speak a little bit more to how engagement has looked, what kind of feedback you've gotten, the scope and breadth of who you've engaged around this? I'm kind of curious about the meeting.
Yeah, so look, we firmly believe it's part of our ethos as an office that in order for us to solve the problem, we need to understand the peculiarities of the problems at the location where the problem resides. The challenge with broadband is, and I think I mentioned it before, it's functionally a 64 parish problem. The challenges that we're going to hear and rain on farmers are going to be far different than if I were to assemble a group of teachers in Livingston Parish when it comes to broadband. And so when we think about the creation and development of our 5-year plan that's mandated by the federal government that we're currently doing with the development of digital equity, there are a number of covered populations that we have to, it's important for us as an office and as a state to hear from, to understand the challenges that people under different covered populations have when it comes to accessing high-speed internet. So from our perspective, talking to farmers, talking to folks that were formerly incarcerated, talking to folks where English is not the primary language, talking to folks where, where for the first time, folks that are that are disabled, historically disenfranchised. We have to understand the challenges from a stakeholder perspective that each one of those covered populations have, because it's going to help us better understand the tactical perspectives and how to address their challenges through the dollars that we're receiving. So that's it. So we're assembling all that from these stakeholder engagement meetings, and then what we're going to do in April, May, is to release what our findings are and to get public engagement feedback from all of you.
Thank you so follow up there. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure this body would for sure be very interested in those findings as well.
Absolutely.
We want to hear more. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from the board? Ms. Iyer, thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Have a great day.
Anything else from the board before we move on? Any objection to the motion? No objection, motion passes. Next item, please.
Your next item is on page 9, item 4.1, consideration and request for local education agencies for waivers of policy contained in bulletins submitted by the State Superintendent of Education. The department recommendation is to approve as outlined.
Can I have a motion? Mr. Garvey, and a second. Ms. Holloway. Superintendent Brummer, any presentation? Any questions or comments from the board? None? I don't believe we have any public comment. Any objection to the item? No objection, item passes. Next item, please.
Your next item is on page 13, item 4.2, consideration of TOPS University Fast Forward Pathways and Jumpstart 2.0 Career Diploma Fast Forward Pathways. The department recommendation is to approve.
Can I have a motion, please? Ms. Davis, or Dr. Davis, second by Mr. Garvey. And Dr. Bowman?
The only comment is just these are some exciting new pathways, both that lead to associate's degrees or apprenticeships within local communities, and so we are excited to bring that to you today.
Okay. Any questions from the board, comments? Hearing none, any objection to the motion? No objection, motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 16, item 4.3, consideration of an update report regarding recent public comments received via the LDOE online portal for the early learning development standards. The department recommendation is to receive.
Okay. Mr. Garvey, motion, do I have a second?
Substitute motion, please.
Okay. Ms. Holloway has a substitute motion.
I move that we direct the Louisiana Department of Education to review and revise Section 303, Social and Emotional Development, taking public comment and concerns into consideration.
That's a substitute motion by Ms. Holloway. Do I have a second to that motion? Mr. Morris. Superintendent Brumley. Any other questions or comments from the board?
Do we have any public comment on this?
We do.
Okay. I'm interested, I certainly, when I talk about it, I'm interested in the public comment though.
Okay. As of right now, I see one public comment card. Ms. Paige Lowry, if you can come down.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for taking public comment this morning, and thank you all for allowing us to be here. I'd like to start off by thanking this board, this committee, for allowing the public to do additional participation in this process. And the additional public comment period that took place in May and June, there were 18 comments submitted. Since this second opportunity for the public to participate, there was almost 600 comments submitted by the public. So I think that speaks significantly to the public wanting to be involved in this process and not being well aware of what took place back in May and June. I'd like to point out some of what I summarized from the report that you guys got. Of those almost 600 comments, you had about 250 comments that actually came from someone that identified as a parent, guardian, grandmother, grandfather. And of those comments, 92% of those comments did speak in opposition and concern around a single domain in these standards. That domain being social and emotional development. I know we've had a lot of discussion about that in the previous meetings, so I wanted to bring that to attention. The other thing that I'd like to mention is if this board was to allow the Department of Education to take in consideration of the public's feedback, that it would not delay this process as far as being implemented in August, which I think is a very important point to make. Because if come March, you guys look at this and say this is not something we want to accept, you can always revert back to the previous standard and obviously move forward with that implementation. The other thing, out of respect for the hundreds who left comments during the portal, during the holidays, which I think was very significant. People were busy during the holidays. I know all of you were. I know I was. But they took the time to participate in this process. Then I think out of respect for them, this board should take that into consideration and allow their position on these standards to be up for discussion with yourselves and also the Department of Education. Further, I think it would make sense to address these concerns at BESI rather than through legislation. I think that's an important thing. The time and energy during the session should be focused on funding, getting additional funding for early learners, and not on the nuances that we've been discussing here for months. So with that, I thank you again. I hope that you consider kicking this back to the department for consideration of those public comments.
Thank you, Sonia. Dr. Sonia, and also we have a card from Representative Freiberg. If Representative Freiberg is here, she can make her way down as well.
Good morning. Dr. Libby Sonia, Executive Director of the Louisiana Policy Institute for Children. I think it is important to consider the 600 comments that were made. I would recommend that the process be for the committee to review those public comments and then make recommendations to address any public comments that were made. To go back to the educators and back to the experts that worked for over a year on these standards, to really take in the 600 public comments instead of it just going directly to the department, but going to the committee that helped develop the standards, but definitely taking in the 600 comments that were made.
Thank you, Dr. Sonia. Mr. Garvey, one second.
Sure.
Let me just make sure. Representative Freiberg, I don't see you. You have a card indicating that she wishes to speak. If she comes back in, we will allow her to speak with Mr. Garvey.
Yes, Ms. Davis asked me to note on the recording that Mr. Harris, Representative Lance Harris, asked that we distribute the email that he sent to, I think, all the best members yesterday. But just to make sure that they have the email in front of them, we're passing it out. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll make sure that we put this into the record. It is a letter, looks like signed by 8 members of the House Education Committee. It appears that it was sent to all of us and everyone on the House Education Committee yesterday. So make sure that's part of the record.
One more thing, point of information, really, a question for the superintendent. The motion that's on the floor now, does that prevent you from getting input from this committee and letting them review the issue and speak to you about their concerns or suggestions?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Representative Freiberg.
Good morning. Good morning. Again, thank you for your service and thank you for hearing from me again. I think I've been here every time we've discussed this issue at BESI. I, as you know, am very much in support of the standards and would like to see them go through as they currently are. However, I do believe that this is something that BESI and the Department of Education should be handling, not the state legislature. We are not people over there who know a lot about education, particularly early childhood education. And it's so very important to this state that I believe I would request that you send this back to the drafting committee, let them take another look at it.
saw Lance's letter, and I appreciate what he was trying to do. I do not want to tell the committee what to do. I want the committee to look at what some of the options might be and to go from there. But I would ask you to send this back to the committee and let this be the SE and the Department of Ed and your expert committee's decision as to what we do.
Thank you, Representative. Ms. Hyde.
Good morning, my name is Christy Huck, and I appreciate everything that you all have done with regards to these standards, what you did in August with the social studies standards. I agree with Representative Freiberg and with Paige Laurie that we would love for everyone to look at these standards, kick it back to the LDOE, instead of going to the legislature, as Representative Freiberg just pointed out. You know, that's really not their job. This would be great if the investment board could give it to LDOE. To revise only the SED domain, taking public concerns into consideration, considering that 92% of all the comments made by parents, grandparents, and other family members expressed a desire to revise the SED domain. And I agree with Superintendent Brumley that children belong to their parents and they should be recognized as the experts. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Yes, so I'd like to make a substitute motion that the standards go back to the Standards Review Committee for them to review in light of the public comment that, that we've received. And also, this is so important for our littlest learners that any guidance documents that the department develops for these standards would also go to that committee so that we can have the input. I think this public input has been incredible. And then I'd also just ask Shannon to let us know what we need to do relative to where we are in the process, because I know we've directed Bessie to move forward with this, and I believe we need to get her input on what we hold off on.
So in December, Shannon is executive director of Bessie. In December, we voted, you all voted.
Hold on, the mic.
You all voted to move forward with this as a notice of intent in February. So I'm just wondering if we're going to delay that now. I would need another, if this is going back to the commission with the possibility of revising the notice of intent, then I need direction on what to, when to submit that or just to not submit it at all. If we don't submit it in February, the next day we could submit it would be March 10th, which would be prior to the March meeting. If you all intend on making some changes, then we couldn't move forward with it until after that meeting. So I just would like to have clarification on that.
So thank you, Shannon. So I would want my motion to halt the process for now until, I mean, it's 600 comments, and the Standards Review Committee is just that, a committee of people who have full-time jobs. So I think if we halt for now on that process, that would be the best step, especially if that committee brought the information back to us by April.
Yeah, we need that in the
Ms. Davis, I want to clarify one thing. There was Ms. Holloway's motion, and now it was phrased as a substitute motion, but I don't know if it really was, if it was the original motion. Okay, it was the original motion, so then now Dr. Bopey is offering a substitute motion. Okay.
I would like to second if we need a second.
Okay.
So we would add to that to direct the executive director not to move forward as previously directed at the December meeting,
Okay.
February, not to move forward.
Is that part of your question?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Warren?
Yeah, so following Dr. Bopey's comment, could somebody help us out with what that timeline could potentially look like?
So Ms. Davis would have to do that. If we hear back from the committee, they would have to submit whatever changes. They'd have to submit the whole document to us in preparation for our April meeting. So Ms. Davis, when does that mean they have to get information to you?
April or March, you said, right?
It's 600 comments, and it's a volunteer committee. So that's why I was thinking April would be best.
And the April meeting right now is only to talk about legislative. Can we add that to the agenda?
Well, we have an April 5th meeting, but then we also have an April 17th meeting.
Okay.
Yes.
So just to clarify, it may be likely that we're not going to move forward with that previous notice of intent at all, now that there are changes. So maybe we can have an update item in March, have the commission meet between now and March, and then bring possible revisions in March. So, and then it would start all over again.
These are people who have full-time jobs, so I can ask Ms. Sonia to come up to talk us through what availability is, but then they're having public meetings as well, and they have to make sure people can attend and publicly notice those meetings. So I don't think we get anywhere from rushing. But Ms. Sonia, if you'd like to come up and talk through what you think the needs might be relative to the 600 comments, it might be helpful.
I think the time is needed, so April would be tight, but it would give February and March, it would allow for, because this committee has to follow public meeting laws, so it would allow people that want to be a part of the process to talk this through with the committee, the opportunity to do so. It would allow even more public comment than we've already had, so it would be very transparent as the whole process has been. So it would give proper notice all along the way.
Okay. Mr. Garvey.
Does this committee have a meeting scheduled?
No, so we'd have to reconvene the committee.
And how long does it usually take you to convene a meeting?
Well, I mean, we'd have to get notice out and all of that. So it will probably would be able to meet to probably mid to late February. And we have to review all the 600 comments and then have public meetings to discuss potential changes.
Any work groups within that?
There's separate work groups for each domain.
I guess what I'm asking is it, and without rushing, because we don't want to rush this, as Ms. Bovee said, is it conceivable that y'all might have some feedback ready for us or a revision ready for us in March?
Not March, I would say April.
Okay, thank you.
And then Ms. Davis, in going back to Mr. Morris's timeline question, what happens after that? Let's say the committee meets, they review 600 comments, they report back to us at our regular April meeting, and then can you talk us through the timeline after that?
Yes, if there are revisions to the notice, then it starts all over again. So then it's another advertisement, submission to the register of the new revision, of the new policy, and then, same deal. They have opportunity to comment, written comment on that notice. So it could take 4 months beyond that.
But if we have the public comments in this, my hope is that we get all the public comments addressed in the standards review process. So let's say that happens, right? The standards review committee takes the 600 comments and then they bring it back to the board moves it through, and there's not any issues or public comments that come in the that notice of intent process. What is the fastest that it would move through?
That is the fastest.
Is it 4 months? Okay. So we would be looking by August. That would be official for August.
Yeah, if we submit it May, we wouldn't be able to submit it until May.
Okay.
It would be tight.
It'd be tight.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ms. Davis?
Mr. Garvey.
Yes, Ms. Davis, is an emergency, what's the term, emergency ruling, an option that we could, for 6 months, I think it is, implement these
120
rules
days, which could be renewed.
temporarily in the middle of the summer while we're waiting for the official implementation of the Administrative Procedures Act to kick in for the permanent changes. So we could do an emergency ruling, which would cover us definitely by for August.
Okay. Thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Garvey. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, I
didn't suggest that because there's always the chance that there'll be more comments to notice, and we have to allow that. But why don't we have an update item in March? Maybe not necessarily a policy revision, but just an update on where we are with it. And if it does happen to be ready, we can do it, in March, and then that'll help us out on the timeline. Just get an update and then.
Well, and at the very least, it would be good for us to know that they have met and, the extent to which they've been able to analyze all those public comments. I think that's a great idea too. Thank you. Very helpful.
Dr. Bowman, do you want to add that part about March to the motion?
Yes. My motion was a little messy. I hope you got it.
Ms. Rossi, you can add it.
So we're holding off on the interim process and bringing it back for in March.
Yes.
And
then
sending it back to the.
Send it back to the committee. And we can always, they're coming back in the April meeting with the proposed revisions.
And then they would also be an avenue to review all the guidance documents. I think the issues that people have raised have been incredible issues. And so in hopes that the review committee would be willing to look at guidance documents down the road.
Well, any other public comment or questions? We have a motion and a second on Dr. Bowman's substitute motion. Any objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion passes. Next item, please.
Your next item is on page 17, item 5.1, consideration of TOPS Tech early start training providers. The department recommendation is to approve.
Can I have a motion, please? Ms. Bochet and Dr. Davis. Superintendent Owen? Nothing from the department. Are there any questions from the board? We do not have any public comment. Any objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion passes. Next item, please.
Your next item is on page 19, item 5.2, consideration of an update report regarding LDOE progress toward meeting key performance indicators for ESSER investments. The department recommendation is to receive.
Can I have a motion, please? Dr. Davis, Mr. Morris. Superintendent Drummond.
Yes, sir. We want to provide this board and the public an update relative to some of the key performance indicators that we have been working over some time to develop, show how those have alignment to the funding sources that we have available, show how spend down is occurring. I think if nothing more, this will, at a minimum, highlight or continue to highlight some of the key priorities of this department and this board, but also provide some level of insight to the public on where we stand presently in terms of some of these key performance indicators and the funding sources that are being used to support them. So I've asked Danielle Mitchell to make the presentation.
Good morning, Danielle Mitchell, Department of Education, scooting over, pardon me. This is an update on our key performance indicators, but also an opportunity to share the first iteration of the preview of the dashboard that we have built based on a number of questions, inquiries, and pushes from you all, rightfully so, as the agency in charge of and a steward of some of the largest resources flooded into our education system. It is imperative that we are not only transparent, but accountable for how those resources are used. So today, you all have seen these figures before. Just a reminder that the 3 tranches of our ESSER dollars do go through September of 2024. That is the period of availability, which is different from the period of liquidation, which is a little bit longer. One of the things we wanted to highlight today was just an update on the ESSER balances. In terms of our ESSER 1, we left less than 1% on the table, and all of those are the formula dollars at the discretion of our school systems. So at this state, we are fully prepared to fully liquidate all of our dollars for that 9.5%. So as you can see, ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 respectively have a spend down rate according to that timeline of the period of availability. Additionally, it's important to note the increase in the amounts allocated with both ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. Before we move on, I did want to just make a connection here around, in general, how the federal funds work. You think about IDEA or Title I. It works in the same process as ESSER, which is states are awarded funds based on a variety of factors at the U.S. Department of Education. Once that award is provided, it does not necessarily mean that that money immediately leaves the department and enters our coffers here in Louisiana. We, just like all the other federal funds, operate these on a reimbursement basis. Similarly, so do our school systems. So even though they have budgeted and committed funds, they could have for example, $3 million project for summer learning that goes over 3 years. So you may only see a spend down rate of $1 million each year, but those $3 million are fully committed and budgeted for an activity. Therefore, when we are showing information, we are looking at the funds budgeted, because that will provide us the most accurate narrative for how systems are utilizing their funds. It does not mean that they are not spending down and requesting reimbursements on a timely manner. It just simply means that they may be submitting that reimbursement request on a different timeline. Each school system may submit it monthly, or one school system may submit it annually. That just depends. But as long as that's within the period of availability, we have no concerns with making sure that we're supporting our school systems and actually spending down these dollars. So just a quick caveat there around how the federal funding planning, the encumbering or obligating of those funds, and then of course spending and liquidating.
So that means that these pie charts represent the funds that districts have committed to, but not necessarily funds they have spent. Is that the right interpretation?
This is actually spent. What we're going to see in the KPI and the investment reporting dashboard is budgeted. So that will give us a bigger picture of how the systems have committed funds. But this is a spent down. So these funds have actually gone through the reimbursement process, and what we would designate as the school systems have actually spent these dollars.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Next, we're going to look at just a quick timeline. I think it's fairly self-explanatory around the activities that we have undertaken here at the department, as well as our school systems. We know the planning and budgeting period, setting those priorities, was imperative to really making sure that all dollars are going towards those activities that are going to give us the academic return on investment to help our students accelerate their learning and close that achievement gap. So we wanted to just provide a brief overview of this. One of the things to note is in the orange section, you'll see what brings us to our meeting today is the reporting in our partnerships. So about a year ago, we were pushed to not only report our key performance indicators to you all as the board and our stakeholders at large, but then also that transparency with how our dollars are being budgeted and spent. And so we knew that our quarterly reporting, as it has been experienced in a PowerPoint, was not necessarily allowing our stakeholders to have a quote-unquote double click to really understand when I'm seeing a certain goal set, what does that mean? Or I'm seeing a certain objective set, what does that actually mean? What's the definition of that? How are we really progressing here? What's the other work that's happening? So we took that charge seriously and worked with a number of partners, including LSU, our comprehensive center, who is actually here today and will be helping me click through the dashboard and in just a moment, to build this interactive dashboard that will go live in February. So we are making final tweaks right now. But we wanted to just kind of highlight that this has been almost a year-long process of getting to the point where we are today to preview that work. So as indicated in the most recent BESI meeting, our new reporting dashboard is to accomplish 3 things. First, reporting on those key performance indicators. So how are we progressing on the objectives that we deem to be most critical? And then of course, how is that work supporting the achievement of our critical goals, our 6 critical goals, which are the framework of all of our agencies' work. And we're looking at that year-over-year data by school system and by student groups. The third component of the dashboard is going to be our ESSER investments. So being able to look at how school systems have budgeted their dollars, not just formula, but also the dollars that we as the state have flowed out as a part of our 9.5 set aside. So that's the incentive portion. And how are those investments, the budgeted amounts, how are those correlated with the actual student outcome? So today our goal is simply to just explore it, to get an overview of really how this dashboard can provide information, how it can be further studied and analyzed. Again, the caveat here is we are continuously building and refining it with the launch to go live in February. But we did believe that it was critical for us to come and show you the progress so that you all can see how we are putting together this information for all of our stakeholders. So at this time, we will go into the dashboard, and I'm going to invite a member of our Comprehensive Center partner to come and sit next to me and click through the dashboard as I kind of explain it. So please allow Lauren from our Comprehensive Center to come and do the technical clicking. Thank you. Okay, so you should just be able to click on that. If we don't encounter any technical difficulties. So as you can see, the first part of the dashboard is just simply the opening landing page where we have those 3 components previously explained. So we will go through a high level of just kind of the preview of each of these dashboards, and then really talk about how each of those can be used to do further exploration, look at a narrative, be able to connect some dots. So looking at the first one, our 6 critical goals, we're all very familiar with that. The agency's outlined from a student's successful progression from birth through graduation. So when we click on the 6 critical goals, you'll see that at the top, those 6 rectangles represent each of the critical goals. And then there's 3 components for each of those pages. So for example, if we click on the second critical goal, we are looking at students who achieve mastery on their 3rd grade assessment. There are different data points and different ways that we can slice and dice this information to learn more about it. So in the first part, it's looking at our change over time. How are we progressing? A year-over-year trend of that critical goal data. And not only can we look at it by student groups, so we can just click on the drop-down to show that. And so you can look at this by student group, but also you see right next to it, you can look at it by subject. And then you can look at it, you can not only see Louisiana, but you could also click different school systems. So we can just select one of those school systems to show an example of how this would be displayed. And what you'll see is the Louisiana line and then that school system line, a year-over-year analysis of that. So that hover feature that you see displayed right now is embedded throughout the dashboard, and that just provides all of our stakeholders with a little bit more information about what different data points or information is. So then we look at the the middle component of the dashboard. And now we're looking at Louisiana's data, and what this will show is a deeper dive of our student groups. So how are they making progress over time? And what this is actually showing us is from the prior year to the current year, what is that difference or growth that those students are making? And you can look at that by race or by special population. So different ways to explore the progress of our student groups. The third component of this page is going to show the academic progress and the percentage of a specific student group to really be able to identify some models of excellence. So for example, if we are looking at our percent of economically disadvantaged students, we see that there are, and then your vertical axis is your percent of students who have performed mastery and above. So you're able to identify some of those models of excellence. It's a point not to necessarily go into and say, what are they doing, but to simply ask that question. It's a prompt to say, this is a high-performing school, and they have a high economically disadvantaged population. So really something to spark conversation and spark, I think, more information exploration. So this is the first dashboard, and there are 2 other features where you can download and export this data for our data-friendly friends. And you can also download PDFs of the visualizations that you see. And this is the same capacity that you have on each of the dashboards. And I'm so excited to see some enthusiasm about this. I get very enthusiastic as well. Okay, so now we'll go back to the main landing page. We'll look quickly at the second dashboard. This is our key priorities and indicators. As you know, this has previously been presented in a PowerPoint, which takes hours and hours and hours to put together. And we have worked for months to get this in a more, not just automated way, but where our program people are going into a place where they can enter this information and really own that data in real time. And then that feeds into this dashboard on a quarterly basis. Now, it is also, I think, important to note that the majority of our key performance indicators are annual. So you're not necessarily going to see quarterly updates. However, some of those annual data points do come in different quarters throughout the year. So we just want to kind of call that out. But we'll go to, just an example, we'll go to P3, I think maybe keeping on the same trend. And we are also collecting feedback and getting final tweaks and improvements on how we can make this dashboard even better. So please note that. But we'll look at the objective for literacy goals and data. One of the objectives that you all are very familiar with is increasing the percentage of students who are performing at mastery and above on the statewide ELA assessment. And then, of course, you have your key performance indicators associated with that objective right there. And then you have a target status. And that target status is obviously going to be related to what you see right next to it, which is the prior state, current state, and target. But if you hover over that target status, what you see is a little bit of that double click. So some more information about what is this, what are some of the related activities that we're doing, what is the information that's driving this target, and associated links. So if you have links to like the data source or a different data file, you'll be able to access that link right here. You don't have to exit and go anywhere else. And then if you keep going over, what you'll see is just the prior state, then the current state, and in that hover over, you see that the year for that data is available. And then, of course, the targets. So targets are set by our program offices, by the program leads, in collaboration with their assistant superintendent and the superintendent. And so we're really excited to be able to have this information at the fingertips of all of our stakeholders, and making sure that we're transparent in all of that. So of course, we believe the initiatives and the objectives are all rolling up to support the accomplishment of those 6 critical goals that we just viewed. So again, we're making final tweaks to this. I think one of the recommendations already that we've gotten is like, can we have a search bar on this page if we wanted to just kind of click in on literacy or attendance, and that quickly bring it up. So we're finalizing some of those conversations, but this is hopefully a good kind of preview of what the functions will be. So now we'll go back to the last one. And this is the ESSER investments and outcomes. So looking at how have our school systems budgeted their dollars. As we said earlier, the spend down rate And the way that school systems have budgeted, there's not a significant difference at all in what that information is. So we want to look at what they budgeted because it's going to account for the majority of their funds. And as a reminder, school systems can amend their budgets on an ongoing basis. So we are pulling from our electronic grants management system live to provide this information. The first component is an investment summary, which is again going to have that three-part data availability. So this tree map just simply shows from the largest investments based on these categories. And if you go to the drop down, you're able to see you can disaggregate by which fund source. So if you only wanted to look at formula or incentive or just SR2, both formula and incentive. So that gives you some opportunity to do some deeper dives, as well as this information explains what those funds are. So if we have a stakeholder that isn't familiar with what are formula funds versus what are incentive funds, we wanted to put that information right at the fingertips of any user who may explore this page. So that's the investment summary. So we can just click on one of these to show how this would, for example, high quality instructional materials, then has an automatic update in the next two tables. So now we're looking at investments by category and subcategory. So this is where I think caveats are going to be really important. Everything that we're viewing today is based on how school systems have entered their budgets in EGMS. So they have a budget line item where they go and enter text for their expenditure. Then that is what gets approved by our team, our Federal Support and Grantee Relations team, and then that school system proceeds with those initiatives or activities. The way that we partnered with LSU to have several coders create a mechanism by which they are going through more than 18,000 individual budget line items to create categories and put these what you see here in buckets. Put whatever their paragraph says in a bucket. So, for example, if you have a school system that is saying, you know, we're hiring 2 bus drivers, 2 part-time cafeteria workers, and 3 teachers for summer learning, we would categorize that as summer learning based on the algorithm that LSU created. We are now just getting, of course, the first iterations of the outcome of their algorithms, so we are going to be doing even further analysis on how we can fine-tune that. One of the things that has come out of this is a need to really support our school systems and how they're entering their budgets, because there are places where we believe it can be a little bit more clean and more reliable on how they're actually spending their dollars. So there's going to be some professional learning and support for our school systems that's also come out of this. Very similar, I would say, to some of the attendance work that's happened where we realized a need to really support our school systems with data entry. And so that's what you see here. So if we click on high quality instructional materials, we broke this down by category and subcategory, and then you can hover over that and be able to see even those subcategories and the amount or the percent of that total investment. So if I hover over technology, I'm able to see there's online curriculum, and then there's licenses, so on and so forth. And then not only that, I can then go over to the last section of the table, and I'm able to see that by school system. So for this investment, this is the total amount that a school system would have budgeted for high quality instructional materials. But we also know we've got 4 or 5 really large school systems who are likely always going to have the largest amount budgeted, which is why we included a percent of total feature, which really will provide that extra lens into how is this looking within that school system's whole pie. So, for example, DeSoto Parish, for instructional high quality instructional materials, we're able to see what is the percent of their investment in that area. So now the last part is we'll look quickly at the investment and outcomes, and this is probably one of the most fascinating components of this entire dashboard. So this allows us to look at not only how school systems have budgeted their funds, but then let's put that next to the student outcomes. And so you can select a critical goal. So we'll select the second one, so third graders, percent mastery and above on the LEAP. And then you can also select student groups, similar to the other dashboard prior that we previously reviewed. Then you can also select various school systems if you so desire, and a specific like value to display. So we can look at, maybe let's just like check a couple school systems that would just allow us to kind of see how this would look. And then we're gonna look at the year-over-year performance. So if you really want to drill down into a specific school system, you're then able to see that year-over-year performance next to, not for that same critical goal, but then next to the change in percent for the total investment. So if I go to that drop down at the top of the middle chart, the scatter plot, I'm able to select a key investment. So for example, if I want to select on that high quality instructional materials, I'm able to see for the percent that they invested, what is the percent of that performance for that school system year over year. And so we could look at models of excellence within here to see, hey, was there any relationship between an investment made and those student outcomes? Obviously, you're not going to get all of that from this. This is simply to prompt that further exploration with those school systems, with that work that they're doing. But you can select from the different categories in that drop down of the scatter plot to really look at the top ways that school systems are budgeting their dollars. Then the last part of this is very much more like deep dive into that investment. So for example, you're selected on a school system and you're able to see what is the percent of the total, that's how this one's selected right now, in various areas. So you could look at that high quality instructional material, for example, and see 11% is in curriculum, 12% is in salary, so on and so forth. So again, just a little bit of a deeper dive. You can do total or percent, and again, just like the other dashboards, you have the capacity to download the data and or download PDFs of whatever the visualization is that you have selected. So at this point, we will not hit the microphone again, but toggle out of the dashboard and go back to our deck. And this is a timeline of, I believe you all have this, and we'll come back up in just a moment, of the activities that are from basically now through 2024, showing the activities that our agency and our school systems will undertake, including 2 more celebratory comeback recognitions, and being able to just continuously refine that dashboard to make sure that we are not only being good stewards of our dollars and our investments, but making sure that we're providing that information in a friendly manner to all of our stakeholders. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Barney?
Yes, a few questions. One, on one of those slides or pages, it looked like schools had spent more money on property, as you described it, than anything else or most other things. Can you give us a little more information what property means? It's a very vague term, it could be a lot of different things.
It is, and there is a more drill down of some of those explicit examples once you kind of toggle into that, such as like classrooms or outdoor buildings and facilities. So we did see a large investment in those capital improvements and capital investments and property, which we aren't surprised. This administration, we know, has prioritized the return of school, in-person learning, and to see our school systems have a large front-end investment in making sure that children can be in the classroom, in person, in front of a teacher, was absolutely a #1 priority at the beginning of especially the ESSER 2 release of those funds. And so, yes, that would reflect that, but there are very specific ways that you can kind of see what all is included in that property category.
Yeah, I'm glad to see a lot of it being spent on things that will last for years and years and benefit our children for a long time. You mentioned a lot of what you might call accounting phrases such as allocated, encumbered, reimbursed, delivered, budgeted, and along those lines, to try and get some clarity, when you talk about ESSER and ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, and they have deadlines of September 23 and September 24, which of those terms is that the deadline for? Is that the deadline for budgeted or liquidated or reimbursed or encumbered?
So that period of availability is for funds to be obligated. Obligated. So meaning
I haven't heard that one yet today, I don't think.
I've budgeted, I have a commitment for those.
Aren't they?
Say that one more time.
Encumbered and obligated or similar?
So, yes, for all intents and purposes, we have committed those funds. So I think just going back to a very simple explanation, if I have a contract with a partner to provide summer learning for 3 summers, and that total contract or that total partnership is for $3 million, I'm fully committed and obligated those $3 million. However, I may not have that reimbursement of $1 million for that first year, a $2 million that second year, a $3 million that third year. So when I've actually spent or liquidated those funds is different from me being obligated and committed those funds.
And so liquidated can happen after these deadlines?
It can. So there's a small window for basically school systems and the state to just do a book correction and make sure that we are fully expending those dollars, fully liquidating those dollars, but the activities would have taken place within the period of availability.
So the activity has to take place before September 23rd, 23, September of 24?
By September 30th of 2023 and September 30th of 2024 respectively.
The delivery of the item or the service has to happen?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have any concern that this money will be spent properly before these deadlines?
I do not.
It doesn't look like it to me either, but I wanted to get that on the record. Thank you.
Dr. Davis.
I would just like to say how excited I am about this dashboard. Can't wait to get on with all of the data, and especially the downloadable feature that you've got is really exciting. So I'd like to thank your team, as well as the team at LSU that helped you guys put all this together. And I'd also like to say thank you to all of the school districts out there and school systems. I know that entering all of this data and keeping track of it was an enormous time commitment on the part of districts, but I think it is going to really allow researchers in the future to be able to go in and analyze how we can best invest dollars in the future to be able to move kids forward, and that's really exciting to me. So thank you.
Dr. Bowden.
And I appreciate that, but I also love that on the practice side, while I feel like educators in our state do a lot of collaborating, that having this information publicly available to say, oh, I see X district making these gains, let me go see how they're spending the money, is very powerful. So thank you for all the work that went into this.
Ms. Orange-Jones.
I second what's been said already. Congratulations on achieving this important milestone. And I do agree that I just think this school will be so useful on so many levels. Having somewhat of a national perspective on this, there are so many other narrative stories that I'm aware of in other parts of our country where the story is really one of missed opportunities. And a lot of that comes from the fact that because there was no federal mandate along with the distribution of dollars that said here are the mechanisms for how we will track transparently where funds go, it's actually sometimes hard to know where funds are going or to what degree are those funds actually leading to the most powerful interventions. And so the amount of discipline and thought that's gone into creating that kind of picture here is invaluable. And I know that that would not be possible without the leadership of this board that really pushed for that. And so I'm very grateful for your leadership and all the others that have gotten involved in that. My question is similar to Dr. Gopey's in that I am most interested in how this becomes a learning tool, right? We understand that it has out-year implications, we understand there's a research implication certainly, but ultimately what we want is for educators, systems, schools to be able to look at the data and make informed real-time decisions about what interventions are leading to the most consequential impact that actually transforms student opportunities, right? So my question to you is, what is the strategy alongside this incredible tool to actually advance systems learning in pursuit of really understanding and having this board also be able to understand what the interventions are that lead to progress?
Thank you again, too, for your push and your support. You were an integral part of making what we saw today a reality. So keep pushing. To answer your question specifically, there is a plan to ultimately make guidance tools and resources for various stakeholders, families, schools, school systems, and regional advocates and other community partners. For the next couple of months, one of the key activities that we're going to undertake is focus groups to really garner that feedback and that dialogue from different users so that we can understand what are some of those, to your point, step by step. If I am a school system, what is the step by step that I would be interested in looking at? If I'm digging into literacy, or I want to dig into my 8th grade math, or I'm digging into the summer learning and I see a system who's progressed there. So we will continue our work with our partners. It is not done. LSU, our comprehensive center, to ensure that this is coupled with guidance documents, resources, and tools. Additionally, we have already discussed a feedback and question feature that's embedded into the dashboard, and that will be another easy way. If someone is looking for something specific, they can't find it quickly, how are we building that and utilizing the technology to help users really extrapolate the information that they need and guide them with the right questions to make those informed decisions. What we don't want is to say, this is what you should be doing. It's not our job. Our job is to say, here's the data, and here's the different ways that you should be thinking about it and looking at it, but then how can we guide that informed decision making is, of course, the ultimate goal here, and we're going to use the next couple of months to build on this work, get that feedback from stakeholders, and create those tools and resources.
Mr. Moore?
Yes, I just want to echo my colleague's comments. I've referred to you in the past as the $4 billion gatekeeper. I think that's an appropriate term. It's critical to the process, and it's just an important assignment, so I appreciate the work. It's obviously a quality product. Transparency is super important, particularly this amount of money. But as Ms. Orange-Jones alluded to, the real value here is how those investments tie to student outcomes. You guys have captured that so that it will enable strategies to follow up. So I said you said that we get an update and actually we'll go live in February. So I'm curious when you come back to this board. Personally, I'm particularly interested in the literacy KPIs. We have some data populated and so forth. I'm curious when you guys will come back to us with a review on those, how these assessments specifically are tied to outcomes. And then I've got a number of stakeholders in my district interested in the same approach you've taken, but as you alluded to earlier, the idea of funding and how that is allocated to districts, what that spin looks like, and the same thing, as you've exampled here, is how are those investments tied to student outcomes. So I'm really looking forward to the search feature that we talked about, and then if you could just help me fill in a couple of blanks there with regard to when you think you'd come back to us with the KPI reviews for literacy and idea investments.
With the building out of this dashboard, we are now able to provide this information to all of our stakeholders at their fingertips. on a, what we would say, real-time or that quarterly basis. So in terms of how that would go, what it would look like going forward, providing regular updates to Bessie would really be driven by the questions and the inquiry from you all as a board. If you all have the information at your fingertips, being able to direct some of those very specific inquiries or what you all would like to see is something that then we can adjust and make sure that we're bringing forward to that specific Bessie meeting. The other thing that I'll say is the objectives, those key performance indicators are owned by our fantastic program offices. And so providing this information gives that level of data and that insight, but really digging into what is being done, how are we pivoting, what are the new activities that we're standing up. Our program offices are going to be the best position to really speak on that work. And so I would say as any specific body of work is wanting to, we're wanting to explore more at the next Bessie meeting, we would kind of look at who are the rightful owners of that, point to the information on the dashboard, but then make sure that those experts are available to speak to their work.
So what I'm hearing is it's available by request.
Mr. Morris, it is always available by request, yes.
Any other questions or comments from you? Thank you. Any objection to the motion? Hearing none, next item, please.
The next item is on page 23, item 6.1, consideration of an updated report regarding the success to attendance recovery task force. The department recommendation is to receive. Updated backup has been distributed.
Have Dr. Bowden. Mr. Rock. Superintendent Berman.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Murray. At this point, I'm going to ask Dr. Singleton to come up and provide a brief presentation. So much of this work relative to chronic absenteeism and truancy truly is in its infancy, but we have to get to a place where we have clear definitions, which we really don't have at this point, and universal appreciation of those definitions, but also we need to get to a place where we have cleaner data. Once we can get to a point of having accepted definitions universally across the state and then also clean data, then we can go to the next phase, which is actual intervention on improvements. And so at this point, we'll just ask Dr. Singleton to make this presentation.
Good morning. The STAR Task Force was formed in the summer of 2022. The group consisted of a committee of vested individuals focused on attendance-related issues. In our first meeting, the task force identified 4 critical barriers and potential solutions to attendance-related issues. As a result of that particular meeting in July of 2022, we did a lot of research, reviewed policy, reviewed the children's code, listened and spoke with attendance individuals related to attendance-related issues across school systems, from juvenile courts, from community involvement programming. The task force took a deep dive into the data at the state level, discussed data at the system level, the need for common terminology, as well as more transparency of attendance data as a whole. So the recommendations that are presented before you are tools that we feel that should be embarked upon by the department and this board to improve data and attendance-related issues. The first recommendation that we have is to define chronically absent. Last summer, the definition of chronic absenteeism was presented to you as a student missing 15 or more days of school for any reason. That includes all absences, excused, unexcused suspensions. This definition is not in statute or policy. This is basic guidance that we have provided our systems to utilize. After reviewing statute and policy from other states, research This recommendation seeks to align Louisiana's definition with the U.S. Department of Education's definition of chronic absence. By formally adding this to policy, it will allow for consistency of data interpretation and facilitate the support of instructional resources for students. So our recommendation that we will bring back to this board in March is to formally place the definition of chronic absenteeism in policy. So that is the first recommendation that came out of this particular task force. The next recommendation that comes out of the task force is to revise the types of absences that are in policy. Currently, there are 4 types of absences in policy, and we seek to reduce those to 3. These codes will be excused, unexcused, suspended. Again, this will help with data interpretation and consistency across our school systems. So this particular chart provides what it is currently in policy, and the column on the right are the proposed policy changes that we seek to make to bring back to you all in March. The next recommendation focuses on ensuring academic credit opportunities for students, and this particular recommendation really falls in line with the previous recommendation. This focuses on the actions of students when they are absent. Students are in school to learn, to increase their knowledge. When they are absent, they are missing out on those academic activities. This recommendation provides an opportunity for students to engage in those academic activities even though they are not present in school. Students should be provided an opportunity to make up assignments in a timely manner. So we have indicated that students should be allowed to make up tests and assignments and eligible for the same academic credit and grades originally available when completed in a timely manner. That is a 1-to-1 ratio of days missed to when they have the time to turn in that particular assignment. And this will also we will also bring this as a policy update to you all in March. The next recommendation has to deal with attendance data reporting. At present, attendance data is reported quarterly at best from our school systems. We do not have anything that states that data has to be provided to us on a regular cadence. This particular policy changes that. We would like for our school systems to report attendance data on a daily basis. So a question has come up as whether or not this is an impediment to our school systems. It is not. 90% of our school systems report attendance data electronically. They use either J Campus or Power Schools. We have been in touch with those particular providers, and they have indicated that this is an option that is already available to our school systems. It's just not utilized at this point. Another concern is that what if a student is absent on one day and they are marked as unexcused, and then they bring in an absence, a note indicating that the absence should be excused. The school updates the information in the data system, and then that rolls back up to us as a correction. So the data is still reported in such a manner that we're getting real-time data so that we are able to see what is happening, what is occurring in our systems more frequently than we are at present. So again, this will call for a policy update that we will bring back to you in March. Our next recommendation has to do with providing common terminology. Right now, a lot of the language that we see in policy and statute has the terms habitual or excessive. Neither one of those terms are defined, and so we would like to work on the language that we see in policy and statute, and this again will take some time to do. This is not something we are bringing back immediately. Recognize that this task force is not done. We still have work to do. These are just initial recommendations. Some are going to come sooner, some are going to come later. So we're proposing to provide cohesive terminology and definitions across statute and policy with this recommendation, that we're still in the process of working on. Recommendation number 6 has to deal with creating a communication guidance flow chart. As I indicated, we had a lot of stakeholders participating in the task force, from our juvenile justice system to our community organizations that assist with attendance. We had Louisiana Department of Health, we had Office of Behavioral Health, we had a lot of input from various stakeholders. Each one of those stakeholder groups have different interventions that they are undertaking when they are working with these attendance-related issues. Personally, I met with a local juvenile court judge, and she presented me their flow chart of how things occur in her courtroom with regards to truancy. I know that Ms. Townsend also met with another juvenile representative, and there was a 3-page document that had to do with what they did with students when it came to truancy. Trying to condense that down to 1 page is going to take some time, because that is what we would like to do so that we can all be on the same page from when they start at the school level, go to the district level with child welfare and attendance. Maybe they're referred to families in need of support. Maybe they're referred to the juvenile court system. Trying to get a cohesive flow chart of what occurs and the interventions that take place is going to take some time. So we're continuing to work on that, but that is what recommendation 6 is all about. Recommendation number 7 asks for us to examine potential use of badging systems for attendance reporting. These are systems where students may have a barcode or something on them as they enter the school, and we can see that they are at school. We know that some school systems have this in place. We want to just examine where this is taking place in our state, look at the pros and cons of that particular system. So again, this is continued work of the department as well as seeking input from the task force. The final recommendation are our next steps. As I stated, this is very important work. We are not done. This is actually just the beginning. So the first few recommendations had to do with policy updates. The last few recommendations had to do with continued work of the task force. So we want to make sure that we are creating guidance for our school systems surrounding the policy updates. We want to review some additional things that came up as far as the barriers that we did not address within this particular within the recommendations that were presented before you. So we are proposing that the task force will reconvene in the fall of 2023. I don't have a particular date just yet, because once the policy updates go through, once we provide guidance through our school systems on data reporting, once we get data, school systems are reporting attendance data on a regular cadence in the fall, then we are able to look at that particular data, make some additional decisions, think about additional policy changes that need to take place, as well as any legislative changes that we see need to take place in the future. So just as a recap, policy updates in March, guidance April through June, policy goes into effect in July, system starts reporting that data on a daily basis in August, and we will reconvene in late fall. Thank you.
Mr. Mallory, one point of clarity for the board. Our department will reject any recommendation from the task force to put a barcode on the child. So we are not going to do that. I think the task force had spoken about potential ID badges. So I just want to make a point of clarification there. Thank you. Dr. Booth.
First question. It seems like there's some statute changes that need to happen, but I don't see that on the timeline.
At this point, we're not recommending any statute changes. That is something that we still have to work through.
Okay.
And we know that this is a short session, so that is something that we are looking forward to in the future. As well as with the children's code, and we know that process takes a long time.
Okay, so second point, a child could badge into school but not go to class. I'm assuming that you guys talked about that, just want to flag it. And then finally, and I do believe we had another task force or group who discussed this, but what's really tricky is our virtual learners. And defining what attendance is for our virtual learners and giving them adequate credit and those kinds of things. So I don't have an answer. I just know that if this is going to be a new requirement, that we'll need to have some clarity around how we'll define that a virtual learner attended.
Thank you. We made that note.
Ms. Fisher?
Yeah, just a question with the definitions. We're looking at a chronically absent student as those who miss 10% of the number of days, which is proposing for the definition to be. I'm also looking on page 8 with the excused absences, where we're talking about students allowed to make up for missed work absences, not counting against attendance requirement. Now, I know we have attendance requirements in order to get credit for a course, which is different from, say, an absence designation. But when we look at the chronically absent, you're talking about excused and unexcused together. So we're going to have cases, I think, where students are going to fall into that chronically absent category with a great many excused absences, whether it's illness, whether it's a trip, whether it's an out-of-state funeral or marriage or whatever. There are myriad reasons why students are excused from classes and then allowed to make up the work. So is there any kind of, explanation or delineation? I hate to have a student maybe be considered chronically absent when the majority of his absences are excused.
There isn't a delineation. A chronically absent student is a student who is not in school for any reason. When we see a student that is chronically absent, so we're saying 10% or more of the academic year. So when we start at, say, 30 days, a student that has missed, maybe 20 days, a student that has missed 2 days is chronically absent. So hopefully by seeing this particular data quickly, we set an intervention at that point. So someone at the school or the CWA person is reaching out to find out why that student is absent. And it could be excused, but that student is still considered chronically absent by definition. And they are able to make up that work. Then we have a student who may be missing that is unexcused, and dealing with these types of absences, the revision there, we're still allowing that student to make up the work. So the term chronically absent, by definition from USDOE, includes all types of absences, no matter what. But we are able to get an intervention in place earlier by having these early warning systems and focus on having someone to intervene and focus on why that student is absent.
Right, and I think most of us do that in terms of making up this time. We have Saturday schools, we have summer sessions where they've got to make up, and we have intersessions in between. So there's opportunities, I think, in most school systems for students to make up missed time in order to get the credit. So we do that. I guess I'm a little concerned. You know, we've got all this data collection now and all these dashboards and all this transparency and information. And there are many cases where students then will be labeled as chronically absent, but have very good reasons not to be there, and we internally know what they are, and they have either made up the time or we've done some other type of intervention. I want to just be cautious once we start putting a label on that without any caveat that says this was chronically absent, yet the time was made up and this student has fulfilled, because we have these other recommendations. An excused absence is not counted against the attendance requirement. And in many cases, the attendance requirement is what constitutes whether or not the child was there enough time to receive credit for the course. Not the number of days absent, but the attendance in class.
So, and one thing to note on that, a student can lose that chronically absent label because it's 10% or more of school days in an academic year. So the target changes. So the first 20 days is 2 days. But then, so that student has missed those 2 days, but then they might not miss any more days of the school year. So the target changes. So that student is not considered chronically absent anymore.
But he'll still have a cumulative amount at the end of the year. That 2 days doesn't come off even if he makes it off.
No, the 2 days don't.
2 days stays there, then there may be other days, they to the hospital, then they're on some type of trip or whatever. So that's a cumulative amount throughout the course of the year. So you're going to look at, say you have 180, 178, 80, however many instructional days, and if they exceed 10%, there's nothing in here that I'm saying is, okay, this child exceeded maybe 10% cumulatively. However, he made up these days in this work. So technically, I would consider him chronically not there because he didn't come at another time to make up that time, whether it's a Saturday session or some other kind of session. That's my own concern.
And you will definitely keep that in mind and get into that.
Dr. Davis.
Is that the metric that's going to be included on School Finder that parents can go to learn about their school? Is it the chronic absenteeism?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I guess in thinking about it that way, I mean, there is concern there, right, that you could be labeling schools with high percentages of chronic absenteeism, and they had a COVID outbreak that came through, right, or the flu swept through the school and led to more missed days than they might normally have. And I guess I get the balance of transparency, but also what Ms. Boucher is saying around presenting parents with accurate information that these were excused absences, because you don't want a school labeled as a school that has, 10% of its students not showing up when the reality is, there are very good reasons for those absences, so I guess I'd like us to be sensitive to that, especially if it's going on the School Finder, which is where we're encouraging parents to go and learn about the quality of the school that their kids are attending.
We will address that, thank you.
Just adding a comment, many of us have truancy agreements with our local governmental agency, the judges, the DA's office, or whoever, that we're going through. And we do not report if a child is truant, the absences are excused. So when we look at maybe a higher percentage of chronically absent kids with those excused absences, that's not going to equate with truancy. Because and we've had this happen before, you go before a judge and you send them, and the parent has all these excused absences, they're not counted as truant in the eyes of the judge, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. So as we work through those cases with our local municipalities, we don't even, at least we don't, send any kid to them who by definition like this would be chronically absent. It would be the unexcused absences that we would consider truant students.
Mr. Moore.
Yeah, so first of all, I appreciate your leadership on this. Dr. Simpson, I enjoyed working with the group. It's a very, very diverse group of what I would consider to be significant stakeholders in the process. So it's great to see all those people in the same room and put the flow chart together so that eventually we understand the left hand can talk to the right hand, we can understand what bottlenecks are, and improve the process. Could you make the timeline, can you pull that back up? So there are 8 recommendations from the work group, and I know a lot of this is not yet set in stone, but I'm curious, given there are 8 different recommendations, when we expect to get an update from the group prior to fall semester with regard to if any of these recommendations have been implemented or if any progress is made or not. I'm not really sure about the approval process for these 8 recommendations. Are you guys coming to the board, asking the board to approve these 8 recommendations, or is the approval process individually for each recommendation?
So today, we are just providing this report of the recommendations. In March, we will actually bring policy updates related to several of these recommendations. So that, in essence, is an update that we're bringing back to the board. After March, we as an agency will go and work with our school systems, develop guidance, provide support to our school systems. As stated, the task force will not necessarily meet again until the fall, but we will meet with individual members as needed over the course of this time period to gather input on several of the recommendations that have been made. And then we will reconvene in the fall, and I would assume an update will come back to you all after the task force reconvenes to determine next steps.
Thank you for the clarification. We should expect to hear back in March with regard to specific recommendations for the board to consider for approval as well.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, the input that you have provided today, we will take into consideration to make additional changes to policy.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? We do have one public comment. Aaron Sims with Communities and Schools Gulf South supports the recommendation but does not wish to speak. Before we move on, any other questions, comments, any objections to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 48, item 7.1, consideration of revisions to bulletins regarding the high school social studies assessment transition from U.S. history to civics. The department recommendation is to approve as notices of intent as outlined.
Can I have a motion, please? Mr. Garvey, Dr. Davis, Superintendent Brumman.
Yeah, these are not substantive changes, they're technical based on actions the board has previously taken.
Would you not have any public comment?
I just have a question. It's a technical nature. I'll be pushing it back a year, but currently it says that beginning with this year's freshman, 23-24, but now we're pushing it back to 24-25. Is that?
Yeah, and I think that's correct, but that was the initial intent. It was just, that was an error whenever it was originally in this document.
Okay, so we're saying now then the freshman class of 24-25 as opposed to freshman class of 23-24.
The board approved 24-25 when the register published it. It published 23-24. So what was published in the register was not what the board approved. So it has to be republished with the correct information.
So our policy that's on page 51 in our booklet here, it was just incorrectly written there.
Correct. It was submitted to the, I don't have a copy of your booklet, so I'm not exactly certain what you're looking at.
I'm
But
looking at
if it's old bulletin,
bulletin 741 section 318 that y'all gave us, A, B, to.
Yeah, it is where it was printed incorrectly in the
So
registry.
this is incorrectly printed.
And so we are correcting that, yes. But what is corrected 24-25 is what the board actually approved. It's just not what was printed in the registry.
Okay, there's a lot of schools out there, I think, that were implementing it with the incoming class of 23-24 and stuff. So we really, I think, need to make sure all our school systems out there know that it's really not going to be until the 24-25. Because I know we were all going to be fresh school systems in 23-24.
we'll make sure we're clear.
I was. Yeah, two superintendents out there checking their head, the wall, thinking it's 23-24.
Dr. Baum.
So there's the Bulletin 118 revision and then the Bulletin 741 revision. In 741, it specifies freshman class. In the 118 revision, I don't see the freshman class being specified. And I just want to make sure that's not problematic because I was confused when I was reading it, but then flipped over to the 741 and realized it is the freshman class that you guys are referring to.
I think it's also in this one on page 49, under 6A.
Okay,
Yeah.
Well, it looks like
They beginning with the incoming freshman at 23.
but it Show me what you're talking about, Ms. Bojay.
Letter B,
Don't go to comments.
on 49.
If you're looking on page 49, under B6A, it says beginning with the incoming class freshman 23-24 beyond, the LEAP 2025 civics assessment will replace the LEAP 2025 U.S. history assessment.
Yes, but we're striking through that language.
Well, I know that, because what I'm saying is we're changing it, so
Yes.
I just
So
want to make sure that everybody realizes out there in the schools throughout the state that if we're changing this from the freshman of 23-24 to the freshman of 24-25.
And my question is, do we need to specify in Bulletin 118 that it's the freshman class since we're striking through that language?
There is a 23-24 in letter B, and then 24-25 in the latter. So should the B be 23?
Mr. Lambert?
So there's the strike, so there's two things I think we're talking about right now. The strike throughs have to do with correcting what was incorrectly printed in the register. The class of 24, the incoming class of 24-25 will be the first group that has to take those for assessment requirements. And the 23-24 references in there reference the operational tests for those years. So for 23-24, we will have that test, but it will not count in accountability just yet until 24-25 when it becomes operational. So there's multiple things occurring there, updating the assessment years and what assessments we're offering in what years, as well as which assessments are required for graduation and when they begin to count in accountability.
So
Do you think we-
23-24 class must take an U.S. history, which you sent for assessment purposes?
That's correct.
Do you think we need to specify in 118 it's freshman class? Because that part is, that we struck through that language, the freshman class part.
I do not believe we need to specify that.
Okay, as long, and then there's another piece about, since these tests are being developed for use in Louisiana schools, any school selected for a field test shall participate in the field test. Has this historically been the case?
That's correct.
Okay, do we have schools that object, or?
No, that's correct, yes.
Okay, so you need this?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board? Hearing none, Mr. Lambert, thank you. Any objection to the motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
Your next item is on page 52, item 7.2, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 111, Louisiana School District and State Accountability System regarding student and school growth as it relates to the accountability system. The recommendation is to be determined by the board.
Ms. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Mallon. So members, this item is part of my discovery during the accountability system review last year. It was originally included on the November special agenda, but with all the robust discussion, we just didn't get to it. So we're bringing it back to you for consideration. My personal preference is that we don't put a Band-Aid, because first of all, if you address it. Secondly, that we don't put a Band-Aid on it, and that we really work to find the root cause of the problem. So we give each of you a hard copy with quite a bit of detail with regard to a proposal to get there and to address the root cause of the problem. So essentially, what it would do is it would I would offer a motion for you to consider directing the department to contract less than $50,000 for the third-party subject matter expert or group of experts to research the growth quandary that we find ourselves in from that expert view. What is their assessment of the current system? What options could they bring back to this board for recommendation no later than December of this year? My understanding with regard to the process, if the board's interested, that given the level of detail and hard copy I provided, this is something we can work with Ms. Davis on and defer until tomorrow when she can bring it into the documentation. So I would ask you for a comment with regard to your level of interest and this is something that we would want to pursue tomorrow.
Mr. Morris, just to clarify, I know you gave a good summary of what your actual motion is and what you passed out.
Yes, sir.
And you're looking for a second on this?
Yes, sir.
With it being deferred until tomorrow, so it can be written up and actually put into the proper form?
Actually, I thought Mr. Morris was bringing actual revisions to the policy before I got a chance to look at it, so we don't need to defer it till tomorrow. But it sounds like you want to defer it until December and then add all of this information to you.
No, that was not deferred to December. So my interest would
Defer
be,
the policy. Go ahead.
yeah, so my interest would be for the board to consider charging the department to contract with the third-party subject matter experts as soon as possible. And that group to report back to the board with recommendation no later than December.
That's what I was saying. Defer the item, the actual revisions to December, but have all this transpire in the meantime. So you're deferring this item, item title revisions to the bulletin to December, and then you're referring it to SAC and the Accountability Commission and contracting with this outside agency in the meantime.
Yeah, actually, I would withdraw any proposed changes at this point and wait until we got recommendations from the subject matter experts before we consider the path forward.
But you do want the revisions to come in December.
No,
Oh, you don't?
no, I'm not asking for any revisions at this time.
Okay.
In lieu of that option, I'm asking the board to consider another pathway, which would be to contract with the subject matter experts and come back to the board no later than December with a recommendation, which at that point, the board can consider those recommendations for path forward.
Mr. Morris, if I may, I think the simpler, cleaner would be to defer the proposed revisions to Bulletin 111 without date and to direct the department to do as you outlined in your
That's fine.
Handout.
That's fine.
Does that work, Ms. Davis?
Yeah, you could defer it until the appropriate.
Okay.
That's fine.
Is there a second to that? Mr. Gard? Is there any, Dr. Bowman?
Can I get someone to remind me who all is on the accountability? I believe this outlines some responsibilities for the Bessie Accountability Work Group. So I'd like a reminder of who's on that work group and just
it was Dr. Davis, Ms. Holloway, Mr. Garvey. Oh, it's the president, so it's Mr. Garvey, Dr. Davis, myself, Ms. Jones, and Mr. Morris.
And then, are they all committed to participating? I guess is the question.
Mr. Morris said he is.
I am.
Mr. Garvey, Dr. Davis.
I am.
Ms. Davis, Dr. Davis is. Ms. Orange Jones.
This is the first time I'm seeing this motion on paper, so I'd like to defer the.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I bring up the question, because I know you guys are committed a lot, and there's some time commitments around that as well. So I think we need to give our Bessie members an opportunity to think about their commitments and whether or not, this is something that they have time for this calendar year. So that was the thing that, and I don't know that has to be decided today, but that was the one flag that I had. Another one is a question for our superintendent around budgeting. So $50,000, up to $50,000 is what we're saying here. Would that be enough to contract with someone? 2, do you have the funds to do it? And then 3, is that the way that you want to spend the funds, or would you prefer to have someone do it internally?
We would have to go and locate the funds, Dr. Bofi. I would remind the board that we had previously brought a contract back, I think, last December to do something similar to this, so we were able to identify funds at that point. But I really haven't thought about this particular item over the last week or so in preparation for this meeting, because this wasn't the original motion.
Right.
But I would assume that we could certainly locate the funds and contract for this document.
And would it be your preference that we would contract with somebody to do it as opposed to you doing it internally?
Well, that was our preference initially last December as well, just because someone could help lead the engagement process as opposed to our accountability office having to do that on their own while maintaining their present work scope.
Okay, I appreciate it, thank you.
Mr. Moore.
Yeah, just add to Dr. Foley's comments, I'm assuming that the membership of this work group is flexible, right? If folks want to opt out or someone expresses an interest in joining the work group, there would be some flexibility there. That's a big concern.
You know, it's the first time I'm looking at this. It's a very lengthy motion. But when I'm looking at it first, and I understand we have the Bessie Accountability Work Group, it has on here to make one meeting, make a presentation, receive information, have one meeting from the Accountability Commission, which really should be a commission that really studies this as well. And I'm also concerned that we have two advisory committees for things like this. It's the Accountability Commission and it's the Superintendent's Advisory Council, which are the two advisory groups to us. So I'm a little concerned that the Superintendent's Advisory Committee is being left out of this as well when we take a look, when I'm just scanning the motions and not get a chance to read it in its entirety.
Mr. Morrison.
Yeah, I'm certainly open to adding the superintendent's advisory council with no dental, not giving consideration, so certainly open to that.
Any objection to adding staff as under 2? That is 2 now. Up to what we have in front of us. Dr. Davis?
If we keep the language about the accountability work group, is there anything that would prevent other members of Bessie who might be really interested in this topic but are not a member of the work group from coming to that meeting and participating so they could, you know, I guess maybe the word is ad hoc or something, members of the work group, could they come and participate in discussions in a way that maybe members of the audience do not?
I could speak to that as chair. I certainly don't see any reason why that wouldn't be the case. I certainly know if we were investigating the distinction between a work group / study group and a formal committee. I believe the distinction, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Davis, is around action. Right? So as long as no action is taken, any board members.
And to go off Ms. Orange-Jones, with it being open to the public, we wouldn't have any concerns there about it being a walking quorum or anything.
Yeah, well, the quorum issue is moot when we notice it.
Yeah.
So as many quorum members can come, as long as it's publicly noticed. And of course, you're not making any decisions, like policy.
Yeah, I just have one more question, Mr. Moore.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just for Mr. Morris, given your speaking, I was just curious, if you can speak a little bit more to what you hope will be achieved. I know you have it here, but maybe your voice will be helpful. What ways do you think this will actually move the process forward?
Yeah, sure. So I think we're all involved in this to one extent or another. We all appreciate the complexity of the conversation. But I don't recall, our attended every meeting, I don't recall actually engaging with subject matter expert, national subject matter expert on this very complex topic. So I'm interested in getting that feedback from an array of subject matter experts on this topic and bringing that back to this board so that we can better appreciate what the best practices are across the country in this very complex topic and what options are available to us. And then as detailed in the motion, for each of those options, what would the timeline look like for the adjustments that would be made, and what would the budgeting look like as well?
Any other questions or comments, Ms. Holloway?
Just out of concern about the topics here, thank you, Mr. Morris, for bringing this forward. Now I'm picking up by the chair, Ms. Kira Orange-Jones, who has not seen this prior to, and it pertains to the study group, the work group, is this something that needs time for the group to look at and determine if these items are appropriate? I'm just, questioning that. I'm not quite sure if this is something that the group needs to look at and bring this back to the board for approval.
You could defer it until tomorrow.
Until tomorrow.
Go through it.
So some of these
maybe revise
members,
some
like,
stuff.
we haven't had the time to, so especially the work group. I'm not part of, but I know we have great members.
Thank you for that, Ms. Holloway. I certainly welcome more discussion.
Absolutely, as chair.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any rush to get it today versus tomorrow. I certainly want folks to make an informed decision, give it, appropriate consideration, discuss with other members and so forth. So, 100% support that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bellarmine. I'm going to try to remember all my questions at one time to ask them. This is for Superintendent Brumley. I know that you guys did extensive work with the work group already, and I think everybody would agree that our tests are not yet sophisticated enough to give us the data we need in order to achieve what we want to. And in terms of recognizing growth in the system, and then as Mr. Morris, this all came out as appropriately rewarding schools for it. So the question I have is, do you feel like this is needed, or did you get enough information the first time, the time that the work group has already studied this, to know what else is needed in our tests?
So I think the issue that you raised, and I am not a psychometrician, but the issue that
Me
you
either,
raised
Mr. Brumley, and I don't want to be.
has to do with the granularity of information within our test, particularly at the lower levels of achievement and being able to determine growth at those particular levels. And so, as I appreciate it, Dr. Kofi, that is the concern with our present set of assessments that we have. And that was pointed out by a few of the individuals that we did include that are psychometricians in the previous work of the work group. And so that's how I know that information. I do think that if we are going to take further accountability steps, I do think that it would be important to have some level of engagement with stakeholders moving forward. So, I mean, I don't have a copy of the motion in front of me, but as I understand, I think that is one of the components. So I do think that would be an important concept. We wanted to do more of that before, but that particular contract was not approved to do that. So I do think that would be something that would be important if we were going to take any additional steps.
That's helpful, and I read I see that stakeholder engagement part in here, but I think it's more than that. I think it's around opportunities relative to different choices we make in the test. And so the question is, do you have enough, do we know enough already, or would it be beneficial to engage other people to know the best moves that we need to make?
Well, I think that the growth issue is one that, as far as I've heard from the majority of this board, that this board wants to solve for, both the calculations of that and the weighting of that. I haven't heard otherwise from anyone. And so clearly what we have done so far hasn't brought us to that point. And so whether or not that can be solved this year or next year, I don't know. But this is where I really think the board just has to take action and direct what they would like to see in terms of this particular item. Because we are not bringing anything back in terms of this particular item without further action from the board.
Thank you.
Dr. Bowden, if I could
Yes,
maybe
ma'am.
just offer maybe an option to think about, for y'all to think about is, if the work group is open to all the BESI members, why couldn't we then contract with the group and have the contractor present to the board at the March meeting, April meeting, and lead up to December, as opposed to having separate study group meetings? Like, why couldn't it be directly to the board is what I was thinking, and then also refer to these other councils and commissions? I don't know, do you?
So my initial reaction to that is the depth and the complexity of this is outside of a regular board. right? Our Tuesdays are jam-packed, and they could go late into the evening already. And so, and now I'm not saying that's not necessarily maybe a special meeting, you know, as opposed to a work group. A special meeting might be a good idea, but I don't know that it would be the right thing to do, to put it as part of our regular item, because I think what this is really about is digging into the details and getting to that complexity. So I would hesitate, right, to make it an agenda item at a regular board meeting. I like to eat dinner.
At what time? Yeah, and may I add that we need to remember the list of line items that we had in the board minutes. Is this part of the items that we spoke about? And we mentioned it last time, so when we drew our board back together in the conversation, the list of items that we had in the November 10th meeting. And that these are those line items that we want to look at. Is this part of this? So think about that.
Discussion.
Yeah, is this contract for a consultant, are we talking about some type of psychometricians, people who know the data, have researched data systems throughout the country, and will make some presentations and guidance? Or is this a contract to facilitate meetings and engage stakeholders? What type of contract are we looking at?
I would think both, but I'm certainly open to your discussion.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
I have one. I think the fundamental question that this board should grapple with and ultimately resolve is very simple. Does this board want to take any action on accountability in 2023? It's that simple. If the answer is yes, then perhaps this path would be a useful path to gather more information from expertise and experts and others. If the answer is truly no, then this becomes just a futile exercise that frankly takes up taxpayer time, energy, money, resource. So I think the fundamental question is, I mean, certainly I know where you stand on this, Mr. Morris, because you shared it, you explicitly people. Does the board want to take action on anything related to this, right? Otherwise, the work group can do whatever the work group does with whatever experts they do it with the department, and at the end of the day, that comes back to this board, and the board still has to decide what they want to do. So I think on the front end, that should be discussed.
Very good.
Mr. Morris.
Yeah, so I would counter that the result here may be that the board takes no action, but I would think at a minimum that we have progressed our gathering of knowledge that we can pass on to the next board. And so we have best utilized taxpayers' money to develop an efficient process to acquire that knowledge. We've all recognized it's a complex issue, it's an issue that needs to be resolved, it's important in a number of different ways. And we can take the lead on gathering that knowledge so that if this board does decide not to take action with recommendations that might come back in December, then at least we're setting the table for the next board to consider some appropriate action, and we're not delaying something that they would just start, a year from now. Something to think about.
Mr. Clark.
Yeah, I don't know if this is add or repeat to what Mr. Morris said, but I would phrase it that I don't think the board knows today whether it wants to take any action on this issue, and that getting more information may help the board decide. It may not help the board decide, but I think the next board is going to want to have had this information collected and presented to the public to give them what you might call a head start on them taking action if that's what ends up happening. If this board ends up not taking action, we will at least have gotten some groundwork laid and information collected so that the next board can take action, which I think is good to save time and possibly take action quicker on things that will help students, help schools better evaluate whether they're progressing, help parents better evaluate whether schools are progressing. So I think that anything we can do to help speed that up is good, even if we don't take action in 2023.
Any other questions or comments from you?
Are we deferring this or are we leaving it as, are we incorporating?
I think we're deferring until tomorrow.
Right, my understanding was there was an interest from several members to give it further consideration, and we can defer it till tomorrow.
Okay. So, Mr. Morris, I understand your motion is to defer this until tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
I think we have a second from Mr. Garvey. Is there any opposition to deferring this item until tomorrow? Okay. Hearing none, motion is deferred until tomorrow. Next item, please.
Close the agenda.
Meeting adjourned.
I'll start in 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Yep.
Yeah, and